They claim that I'm violent just cause I refuse to be silent. These hypocrites are having bitch cause I'm not buying it, defiant. Envious because I will rebel against any oppressor and bitches known as self-defense. I show no mercy, they claim that I'm the lunatic. But when this shit gets thick, I'm the one you go and get. Don't look confused, the truth is so plain to see. Cause of the nigga that you sell out all the same to be. In every Jeep and every car.
The crack epidemic actually took place after the Panthers had closed their offices permanently. So, they're in terms of, what actually happened, the crack epidemic really went into full flame after the Panthers were gone. But it wasn't just the Panthers, and that's what I want to put. The Panthers did have a policy towards drugs, and I'm going to share that with you. First of all, the Panthers had rules. I like what Kropotkin said. Kropotkin, great anarchist theorist, actually pointed out, he said, anarchists don't oppose rules, they oppose rulers. Anytime you have a serious organization, you're going to have to agree on what it means to be in that organization and how you have to conduct yourself. Every member of the Black Panther Party throughout this country of racist America was to abide by these rules. The Central Committee of the Panthers came up with these rules, and they were for the staff, local staffs, and the members, including all captains subordinated to either national, state, or local leadership. And there were consequences if you did not adhere to the rules. You could be expelled. In Oakland, they were big on what they call stomping a mud hole in you. So a lot of physical violence took place within the Panthers. Well, here are the rules now in terms of drugs. No party member can have narcotics or weed in his possession while doing party work. Duh. Think about it. They understood. Don't make it easy for them to lock us up. All right? Any party member found shooting narcotics will be expelled from the party. Period. Now, that does not mean that people that formerly used drugs did not join the Panthers. We have what we call the Malcolm X method of curing drug addiction, and that is work your ass to death. See? One of the things that happens if you give people that have no perspective, a meaning for their life, what you find is participating in the whole ritual of drug addiction becomes irrelevant once people understand what it means to bring about a social revolution. And to be honest with you, it's very effective. Many of the people that were in the Panthers had formerly used drugs and ceased to do so after joining. Point 3, no party member can be drunk while doing daily party work. Number 4, no party member will violate rules relating to office work, general meetings of the Black Panther Party, and meetings of the Black Panther Party anywhere. The reason this stuff comes up, is because the Panthers, we did recruit people literally directly from the street that had no prior political experience. Myself, I would say I would be in a minority of people that joined the Panthers in that I had political experience before the Panthers. I was in the NAACP when I was 14 years old. I left the NAACP after a year and joined the Congress of Racial Equality during the rent strikes in Harlem, which were massive. And then when I went to Manhattan Community College where I met Joanne, or now known as Assata Shakur, Joanne Chesmar, we started getting political. She surprised me because she when she got political, she just took off. And she joined the Panthers, I think, something like 68. I didn't join the Panthers right away, and I'll tell you why. Around 68, that's when they started that COINTELPRO. They started tightening up on the Panthers, arresting us, following us, arresting us, get out of jail, arrest you again. It was really difficult, And at that particular moment, a lot of black people who had started going to college found themselves being, like, let's say, the first member of their family who had ever gone to college. Now, it wasn't the case for me, but for many people it was. So people took the opportunity to go to college, get a degree seriously. And here they're coming down on these guys, and I don't know if you remember. Well, you can't remember. Most of you weren't alive then. And that's why you have to study this. I'm going to quote from some books because I don't want you to just hear me talking. I want you to know where you can get this information. Because if you want to take the Panthers seriously, you should study their history. And there's plenty of valuable and useful books about the Black Panthers. I think this is interesting. No party member can join any other armed force other than the Black Liberation Army. So if you were a member of the Panthers, we were instructed not to respond to the draft. Many of the members of the Panthers in New York went to prison. It got to where they give you 6 months. You know, it got a little better. By around 68, the amount of time they gave you for resisting the draft was a little less. So you generally went to jail for 6 months. Many Panthers faced that. Our position was no, we're not going in the army. Now, believe it or not, historically there is another position. And that is the communist position is the following. Go on in the army. Because in the army, guess how they treat the soldiers, right? And eventually, what we want to do is we want to polarize the army. We want to split the army. Win over what we can in the army and use it to smash the state. And in fact, if you look at histories, particularly the Russian Revolution, there was actually soldiers, Soviets. And in fact, it was the Bolshevik policy towards the army that made a big deal, and it made a real difference for them, because then they couldn't use the army against the revolution, you see. Okay. But that was not our position. Our position was do not go in. When arrested, you were only supposed to give your name, and that's it. Oh, they hated that shit. You know, we trained our people not to. But it wasn't uncommon in the black community at that time to know that you don't want to talk to the cops. You got nothing to say to these people. Man, today, the so-called criminal, man, you can see them talking on their way in the cop car. Damn. You wondering, I mean, what could be going through your mind? What do you think you're going to get from talking to these people? You know, but we had a strict rule about that. Okay. The 10-10-10 program should be known by all members and also understood by all members. There was a period when the Panthers were rising, and there was a possibility of a fusion of the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with the Panthers. Some of those members actually joined the Panthers. The fusion didn't stick. That was tragic, and I think we need to study why it didn't. Because had it stuck, and the Panthers started to pick up the rest of SNCC and other militant organizations regrouping with the Panthers, it could have made a considerable difference about how things played out. So, for instance, around 1969, 1970, they took a survey, and they asked a range of black Americans, which group do you support in America do you think represents you? Which black organization represents you? Around 75% of the people, of the black Americans that responded, said, well, they felt that the NAACP and other traditional civil rights organizations represented their interests best. But 25% claimed that they supported the Black Panthers. Now stop and think about that a minute. 25% of over 10 million people, that's a lot of support. That's something to work with. J. Edgar Hoover may have exaggerated to say that the Black Panther Party was the major threat to American security, but he wasn't totally off base in his understanding that we were gaining strength. And his COINTELPRO program, that is his program to disrupt our activities, actually was quite successful. Now, the 10-10-10 program, what was that? That was James Foreman's contribution. James Foreman came from SNCC. He was one of the people that was drafted into the Panthers along with Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown. And he was made, Minister of International Affairs because he had so much experience. You see, remember, Most of the people in the Panthers, the majority of the people in the Panthers, did not have prior political experience. And that was one of our weaknesses, because I want you to hear this. The COINTELPRO activities visited upon us, threw us off base, and disrupted us. And eventually, I believe, were chiefly responsible for the disintegration of the Panthers. But the Panthers was not the only organization that they used COINTELPRO against. It was actually devised for the Communist Party, and it was used against the Socialist Workers' Party. Well, you have to ask yourself, be honest, at least to yourself, and say, well, why didn't those organizations collapse? Well, I'll tell you why. They had more organizational experience. While I don't agree with the program of the Communist Party, I can't deny that their cadre went through an experience through the 1930s of building the unions, organizing in the black community. In New York, 25% of the organization was black in the 30s. So, they had something. They had people who had been around, who knew what repression was about and how to deal with it. The Panthers, on the other hand, we were newbies. We didn't have that kind of deep organizational experience in dealing with the state. So we were at a disadvantage when they came after us and started murdering our leaders, arresting us, etc. And here's another point that most people don't know about our experience, and that is, insofar as the Panthers fought back legally, we usually won. Because usually when they arrested us, they were trumped up, frame up charges. So the best example of that is the New York 21. 21 of the leaders of the Black Panther Party in New York were arrested. This was before I joined, around April. They were arrested. And the state of New York threw everything they could at these guys. They had infiltrated us. We had police agents that were testifying in the trial against us, etc., etc. But dig this. After all of that, 104 charges, 104 charges leveled against 21 Panthers. We walked out of that court after 2 years free. We beat the state. And this was a major humiliation for the state of New York. So insofar as we actually fought the frame-up charges leveled against us, we didn't do too bad. Most of the time we never got to fight it, people. We didn't have the legal apparatus. We didn't have enough lawyers, etc., etc. Huey Newton had a good lawyer, though. So here is that 10-10-10 program you should know, because it's actually useful. I'm quoting from the Panthers themselves here. When they say that we wanted to use, every member should know the 10-10-10 program, so what was it? An explanation of the 10-10-10 program is, whether or not others believe it, the government took serious that aspect of the Black Panthers' teaching that included the 10-10-10 program. If one Panther organizes 10 people, the idea was that those 10 people can then organize 10 people. And those 10 people organize 10 people exponentially, we will eventually organize a mass force. So that was the idea. When you were sent out to get those 10 names, cultivate those people, bring them into party activity, or at least close to the organization. And thus, it's a mass perspective. Our whole perspective was to recruit more people, work with more people, so that we could be stronger. Okay. Some of the other stuff about financial officers and stuff like that is not, I think, as important, so I'm going to let that go. But you hear very...
No, I want to hear about that. Financial officer? People are bad with money.
Yeah, but you know what? It's just a rule. All right, here. All finance officers will operate under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance. I mean, that doesn't tell you much. It's not... These are general rules. These are general rules. Each person will submit a report of daily work. You see, what I think is really important that people need to understand about the Panthers is that through activity with the masses of people, thousands of militant black people began to become literate. I'll tell you the truth. I have probably read well, I don't know, 5 or 6 books in my whole stinking life until I became a Panther. First thing coming up at the door, bam, they give me a book list. You got to read these books. And we were fairly serious about people reading 2 hours a day because we worked the shit out of you. You was out there selling that paper, running the Liberation School, breakfast, plenty of work. You worked. And we had to be sure to give people time for self-cultivation. And it worked. Because our people became fairly knowledgeable, you know, about local realities, history, black history, etc. And we taught about people that had, many of whom were nearly illiterate when they came through the door. We taught people to read. Thousands of people became politicized through our activity. That the Panthers were organizing in labor unions. So, for instance, out here in California, there used to be an auto factory in Fremont, right? The Panthers had a caucus in that factory. And we participated in a wildcat that took place in 1970. And actually, Huey Newton had gotten out of jail at that time, and he came out to the picket line, you know, and the Panthers brought some coffee and food to the strikers, okay? And it's funny, people talk about terrorism. The workers were pissed, you know, it was a wildcat. It was not a officially sanctioned strike. And I don't know, so somebody burned down something, you know, people do crazy shit. I mean, in real strike situations, you know. But it wasn't all of that yap, oh, terrorism, oh, lock the door, you know. Listen, in about 1970, there were 1,000 bombings. 1,000 bombings by the Weathermen and other type groups like that. 1,000 bombings, and they didn't go on about no war against terrorism because we were better organized, and they knew they couldn't get away with that shit. There is no war against terror. This is a bourgeois or a 1% bourgeoisie. The capitalists want to do everything they can to discourage you from becoming a revolutionary. One of the ways they do it is they try to discredit people that tried to be revolutionaries before you. One of those groups is the Black Panthers. So they'll use Huey Newton's death and try to say, see, that's what they was about. Well, actually, that was not what we were about at all. Now, I'm going to get into, you know, how Huey evolved and what happened a little later. But just know, they don't talk about Emory Douglas. Emory Douglas has been here for years, still participating, still doing his artwork. And many, many other. Kathleen Cleaver became a lawyer and is teaching some law school. Any revolutionary movement that cuts out on its course, if it does not succeed, does not successfully lead a revolution, it will tend to degenerate. Not just the Panthers. So political degeneration is unfortunately a fairly common phenomenon. See, that's what tends to happen. If you don't succeed in carrying out the revolution, then you start to slow down, people get discouraged, quit, fall away, people change their minds, etc., etc. All right? So just understand that when I talk about the 3 phases, so I'm saying from 66 to 69, clearly a revolutionary period. The Panthers were involved in a lot, even the women's movement. The gay liberation movement, Black Panthers were involved in it. Okay? Between 69 and 71, the Panthers were really being attacked by COINTELPRO, and there was extreme disorientation inside the organization. If you open up the papers, you see people constantly being expelled, you know, and not all of those people were police, let me tell you. We were paranoid. We didn't know about COINTELPRO. It was something that was happening to us, and we think, what the fuck's going on here, you know? In fact, there is an excellent book that has just been released. It's called The Burglary, and I urge you to familiarize yourself with this book. It is about a group of Catholic workers, people of faith, religious people, who figured that something was going on wrong with the anti-war movement, wanted to know more. They broke into the FBI building in media Pennsylvania, stole the files. These were COINTELPRO files, and turned them over to the Washington Post. I wonder what would happen today if these same people pull that action off. But anyway, so understand, COINTELPRO was something that was happening to us, but we didn't understand it. So for instance, when the FBI would send letters to Huey Newton signed by Elridge Cleaver, they would say something like, "You're a punk, I'm gonna blow you away." Lack of experience, newbie. It never dawned on him, well, why don't I ask Elridge, did he write this? Stop and think about it a minute. Rather than to assume that indeed your own member is taking a hostile approach to you, find out, is this what did you really write this letter? Rather than to get on a war footing internally, because eventually what this led to is Panthers killing Panthers, which was, I think, the height of the demoralization, and that's when I said, all right, I'm through. That's when I stepped back. That was early, after Webb got killed, and then Napier was killed in retaliation. You know, I wasn't in it for that. So, and I did not believe that, while I had enormous respect for the BLA comrades, many of the best comrades in New York became the Black Liberation Army. I personally did not believe that the route to overthrowing Capitol was through robbing banks and stuff like that, because it cuts you off from the very people that you want to politicize. See, we had influence, mass influence. An interesting thing happened once. The JDL got in their head they were going to attack our office. So they come up in a flatbed truck with chains and bats and stuff. And it winds up, we were pretty popular in the community because we were constantly giving folks stuff. We had the breakfast program, we gave shoes, all kinds. So people kind of, you know, at least if they weren't political supporters, they kind of liked us, you know. And the community went off on them. I mean, we didn't even have to do very much, to be honest, and ran their ass out of Harlem. You see?
You're talking Jewish Defense League?
I'm talking about that's right, the Jewish Defense League. Meyer Kahane was their leader at the time.
What year was this?
That was, I think, oh my goodness, I think that was 1969 that happened.
Wait, why did they want to attack the Panthers?
Excuse me?
Why did they want to attack the Panthers?
Why would they want to attack the Panthers? Because Mr. Kahane was snuggling up to the powers that be. He said, you hate the Panthers, so what the hell, I tell you what, we'll do them in for you. He just got a little surprised because he didn't realize that members of the black community had something else in mind. Okay. Excuse me, I don't see too good no way, but I'm damn sure it's kind of dark in here. Just give me a chance. Okay, here we go. Now, O'Neill was the man that was the FBI informant or provocateur that set up the murder of Fred Hampton. We have done programs about this at the Holdout with our counterintelligence then and now program. Just really briefly, O'Neill drew the diagram of Fred Hampton's apartment. He drugged Fred Hampton, and then when the police came in, Fred was knocked out. He couldn't do nothing. And then he just shot them all in the paper. You have to go out and first group I remember was giving us trouble with the Nation of Islam, to tell you the truth. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So what are you gonna do? We on the corner, they say, well, this is my corner. I said, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it's your corner, huh? Yeah, all right. So now here we go. The next step is, what you gonna do about it? Now you have physical conflict. Fortunately, with the Nation of Islam, we wound up, you know, a little pushing, shoving, punching, but nobody ever got, you know, sent to the hospital or anything like that. And we wound up working that out. And they backed off. And we sold our paper in peace. But understand this, also, when you go to a corner in Harlem, there may be a gentleman enterprising on that corner. And believe it or not, we had conflict with these drug dealers. So here we go, a little information on that. Bar owners, hustlers, and other business people, especially
the black businessmen, all contributed to the Panthers. Now, this is in New York, I remember this. Although many of them did not want this to be known by the authorities. Our people were so committed that the Black Panther Party in Harlem used to take drugs
From drug dealers and pour it down the sewer. All the drug dealers were half scared of the Panthers because we were serious about cleaning up and protecting our communities. As a result, a Panther from the Corona Queens branch, they moved the drug corner from 125th Street all the way down to 116th. And yes, the Panthers got violent. I think one of them shot a drug dealer in the leg for not cooperating. Now that's Harlem. And I actually had a film. There's a film called Pass It On. It's a story of Jeruba Ben Wahad or Richard Moore, one of the Panther 21, where they actually show the Panthers pouring the heroin down the sewer. See, that was our policy when we could carry it out. But we're a tiny group. I don't think the Panthers exceeded 5,000 members nationally. Well, hell, you talking about a country of more than 200 million people, 5,000 folks is not a lot. Okay? And drug problems are not, they're social problems. So while we were striving to become a mass force, actually we were numerically pretty small. Okay. Oh yeah, I want to mention this too. I was just reading a history of the New Orleans Panthers. Now you talking about Malik. Well, that's where Malik was, right? And in New Orleans, same experience. They actually had to run the drug dealers away from the schools because they didn't want the drug dealers selling drugs around the schools, and they did it. So make no mistake about it. That was the actual position of the Black Panthers when we were in our revolutionary thing. We do know this, that there was tension between the West Coast and New York. In New York, all right, I'm from New York, so I can tell you, I think you're all a bunch of country bumpkins, okay? I mean, New Yorkers always felt, a kind of superiority to, black people living in other, y'all country, y'all still country, y'all ain't really, risen to our level and all this kind of, so we constantly going, well, I'll show you what, we'd have our little hats and our little style, and when we, if we went to Oakland, they'd be saying, oh man, let me get one of them hats, because that's the way styles went, New York, and then they go west, So we always thought that we were more sophisticated, etc., than the brothers out here in Oakland and stuff like that, which fed into a little bit of the tension. And then also in New York, to be honest, there was a much bigger black community. Now, it's not even close, and a more longer established black political community.
Some say the government will watch me, but they can't stop me. I'm dropping evil when the people ask my posse. Some say the government will watch me, but they can't stop me. I'm dropping evil when the people ask my posse.
The lion in my eyes when I'm coming for the get back. Big Mac, hot gunfire, hot tires, they burning. They got us all dying and burning. They lying to destroy our earth.